Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. The US Secretary of State prepares for another diplomatic crisis mission as tension rises across the Israel-Lebanon border. Gaza officials accuse Israel of carrying out massacres in safe areas as more civilians die in strikes on Khan Yunis and several refugee camps. The death toll from the Japan earthquake rises to 82 as a critical three-day window to find survivors closes. And parts of northern France under red alert for flooding after days of torrential rain and storms. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is heading to the Middle East once again as fears of a wider regional conflict continue to grow. One of his stops will be Israel, where tensions with Lebanese armed group Hezbollah are running high after the assassination of a Hamas deputy leader in Beirut. 9 Hezbollah members were killed by Israeli strikes late on Wednesday after rockets were fired into northern Israel. The group's leader says it cannot be silent and warned Israel against widening the conflict. Iran's president has blamed the United States and Israel for Wednesday's twin explosions near the grave of an Iranian general. Washington has rejected suggestions that either country was involved in the attack, which killed almost 100 people and wounded more than 200. Iran is holding a day of national mourning, and President Ebrahim Raisi has cancelled a planned visit to Turkey.
I warn the Zionist regime, don't doubt it. You will pay the price for this crime. These crimes that you have committed, you will deeply regret.
Let's talk now to our correspondent, Trent Murray, who's in Tel Aviv. So, Trent, what kind of reaction are we seeing to Iran's claims about who was behind those explosions?
Well, Robin, we are hearing from Israel and the United States that they weren't behind this attack. Now, what I mean by that is a State Department spokesperson has said that the US had no involvement and they don't believe Israel had any involvement either. A spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces was also asked about it. He wouldn't be drawn in on this specific incident, but he said that the focus right now for Israel is its fight against Hamas. But it does come amongst heightened tensions already within the region, and as we just heard there, the Iranians are laying the blame for this attack at Israel and the United States. But we do know that Iran has admittedly made busts on terror cells within its own country. In the past, we know that it has had issues with ISIS, for example. We know it has issues with dissident groups and Arab separatist groups. None of them have claimed responsibility, but we just do know that, as I say, the tensions right now are already running red hot, and so I think this is not the last we're going to hear about it. Whoever was behind this attack, it has clearly garnered a furious reaction from authorities in Tehran, and they are vowing, in their words, a very harsh response. And so I think right now there's a lot of people in this region just waiting and watching to see what that response will be amongst fears of a wider war within the region.
And we're seeing the US Secretary of State making his 4th visit to the region since the start of this conflict. How much has the assassination of the Hamas deputy leader raised the stakes here?
Oh, look, I think it will be front and centre of his discussions. I mean, coming in, we knew that the situation in Gaza was going to be one of his main priorities. Of course, the US and others have been putting pressure on Israel to provide some answers of when they're going to move away from the sort of heavy warfare operation that we've been seeing to something more targeted. But in many ways now, I think some of the focus is shifting to the northern border yet again. It's not to undermine what's happening in Gaza. It is a tragedy there, and we know the escalating humanitarian crisis is one that's got many UN agencies and others very concerned. But right now, we've heard from Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, who gave a speech overnight on television in Lebanon, saying that Hezbollah is ready for an all-out war with Israel if it comes to that. He effectively said that the fighters are on standby and will fight with no limits. And in Israeli perspective, they are looking at this, I think, with some caution. We know that the Israeli army has been placed on high alert. Commanders from the IDF have been up to the northern front overnight to speak to troops up there, telling them effectively to be on standby. And it's just one real flashpoint, which I think has got many diplomats concerned. We've seen, of course, strikes in the Syrian capital, Damascus, this strike against Salah Aruri, the deputy head of Hamas in Beirut, also tracking now another strike in Baghdad. What links all of those is that those are strikes against groups which describe themselves as the axis of resistance, all linked to Iran, groups that consider Israel their enemy. And I think when you sort of look at them all holistically, you can see why there are concerns that the room for miscalculation here now is very, very slim, and the entire region being dragged into a much wider and much more damaging war.
Trent, thank you very much. Our correspondent Trent Murray in Tel Aviv. At least 14 people, including 9 children, have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a house near Khan Yunis. Thousands of displaced people are sheltering in the area. Israeli planes and tanks are also reported to be bombarding 3 refugee camps in the centre of the enclave. Well, our correspondent Noor Harazin is in central Gaza. So, Noor, what's been happening where you are?
Well, a very, very intense overnight and also day of Israeli attacks on Middle Gaza, specifically Deir el-Balah, Al-Maghazi refugee camp, Al-Bureij refugee camp, and the Al-Nusayrat refugee camp. What we witnessed over the past hours actually remind us of how was the situation inside northern Gaza before we were forced to evacuate northern Gaza weeks ago. So, yes, the Israeli forces intensified its attacks on southern Gaza and also on middle Gaza. I mean, there was tens of Israeli strikes, hundreds of shells. There was white phosphor bombs that were dropped on middle Gaza, smoke bombs. According to the Palestinian health ministry here inside the Shuhada al-Aqsa hospital, at least 20 people were killed. Among them are women and children. And here is what is happening specifically in the Al-Maghazi refugee camp. This area, Al-Maghazi, had no evacuation orders, no warnings, nothing. However, since the early hours of this morning, and the Israeli forces have been pounding the Al-Maghazi refugee camp with strikes and shells, forcing many people to evacuate their homes from a safe area to looking for another safe areas, maybe in Rafah and Khan Yunis. However, eyewitnesses now are talking about hundreds of Palestinian families that are still stuck inside the Al-Maghazi refugee camp, as now the Israeli forces have also controlled all the ways in and out of the Al-Maghazi refugee camp. Many families actually woke up to find themselves besieged inside the Al-Maghazi refugee camp. And let me also repeat the fact that there were no evacuation orders. So yes, it is a total chaos here in middle Gaza. We've seen families that are taking shelter in the streets here inside the hospital. We were talking about 700 families that are taking shelter in the hospital. However, today the number is up to 1,000 Palestinian families are now displaced and taking shelter inside the Shuhada al-Aqsa hospital.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent Noor Harazin in central Gaza. The United States, the UK and 10 other countries have warned rebels in Yemen that they will face consequences if they continue attacks on shipping vessels in the Red Sea. The Houthis say they're targeting ships with links to Israel in an act of solidarity with Palestine. China, meanwhile, says it opposes the attacks, calling for united global efforts to maintain peace and stability in the region. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says the international community must impose a solution on the Israel-Hamas conflict as the warring sides are unable to come to terms. Well, let's talk now to Gary Samore, who's director of the Crown Centre for Middle East Studies at Brandeis University. Welcome to the programme, Gary. Let's start by talking about what's happening in the Red Sea. How much pressure is what's going on there, in particular, putting on as this conflict continues?
Well, I think there's a significant risk that the conflict between the international coalition led by the U.S. and the Houthis will escalate. because the Houthis, I think, will continue to attack shipping in the Red Sea. And the U.S. and its coalition partners have warned that they may escalate the conflict and attack Houthi targets in Yemen if that continues. Just recently, U.S. helicopters sank a number of Houthi gunboats that were threatening shipping, and I think we can expect to see that pattern continue.
So that doesn't look like it's calming down, but what's happening there, just one area of additional pressure being put on the Middle East conflict. There's also what's going on in Lebanon and Iran. What is the likelihood of this war spreading?
Well, of course, as you've said, it's already spread in the sense that there's fighting along the border between Israel and Lebanon. There's an escalation of attacks on U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq by militia associated with Iran. And there are the Houthi attacks on shipping. But at the same time, I think the main parties, the big powers, including the U.S., Iran, Israel, they're not looking for an escalation of the conflict. I think Israel in particular is focusing on trying to achieve their objectives in Gaza. And the recent killing of a top Hamas leader in Beirut is part of that effort to try to focus on Hamas. The Israelis are sending signals that at least right now, they're not looking to get into a broader conflict with Hezbollah. And I thought the head of Hezbollah, Nasrallah's speech yesterday indicated that he wasn't looking for an immediate escalation either. And of course, the U.S. is trying very hard to keep the conflict as limited as possible to Gaza. So my guess is that for at least the time being, we're not likely to see a significant escalation into full-scale conflict between Israel and Hezbollah or between Israel and Iran.
So we have the US sending Antony Blinken to the region again in a bid to diffuse tensions there. Do you think that will work?
Well, I think that Secretary Blinken's main objective will be to persuade Israel to shift its military campaign in Gaza. Oh,
I think, unfortunately, we've lost our connection there to Gary Seymour. Unless you can still hear us, Gary, please carry on. If you can hear me, carry on with what you were saying.
Yes, I can hear you. I think Secretary Blinken's main objective will be to try to persuade Israel to shift to a more targeted campaign in Gaza and less large-scale bombing of civilian areas. And there are some indications that Israel is beginning to move in that direction, but we'll see in the coming weeks. I think the conflict in Gaza is likely to continue for a long time because, as far as I can tell, Hamas continues to be a coherent military force, and Israel is a long way away from defeating, much less eliminating Hamas as a military and political force in Gaza.
Gary, thank you very much indeed for talking to us today. That's Gary Seymour from Brandeis University.
Thank you, Robin.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, our correspondent joins thousands of tourists at China's annual ice extravaganza.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. The US Secretary of State prepares for another diplomatic crisis mission as tension rises across the Israel-Lebanon border. And Gaza officials accuse Israel of carrying out massacres in safe areas as more civilians die in strikes on Khan Yunis and several refugee camps. Ukraine and Russia have exchanged prisoners in what Kyiv calls the biggest swap of its kind since the start of the conflict. More than 200 captives from each side have been handed over in a deal brokered by the United Arab Emirates, which has maintained diplomatic ties with Russia. The first prisoner swap in 5 months follows what Moscow's called difficult negotiations. Some of the Ukrainians had been held since 2022. Rescuers in Japan say a critical 3-day window to find earthquake survivors has now closed. The death toll from Monday's 7.6 magnitude quake has climbed and many people remain missing. Tens of thousands of residents are still without power and water as the government allocates relief funds. Our correspondent Terence Terashima reports.
I'm in Wajima City, standing in front of most famous Market Street, where one can buy fresh fish, fruits, vegetables, as well as local crafts and snacks. I have visited here so many times. This was one of the 3 biggest morning markets in Japan that dates back over 1,000 years, attracting hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. Unfortunately, it was burnt down after the 7.6 magnitude earthquake hit the Noto Peninsula. This city was close to the epicenter. Around 200 buildings were burnt down. It is said that the fire spread quickly as it was dense with old wooden structures.
My house was right here, and the one next to it. This is the first time I've seen this. Everything is gone. There was a man living next door, and I heard that he has died from fire. And over there, a family deceased. Luckily, my family was okay.
As of 3 o'clock on 4th January, Ishikawa Prefecture had 78 fatalities, out of which 44 were from Wajima. Many houses collapsed and people were trapped inside. Rescuers tried their best, but continuous aftershocks and rain delayed the rescue efforts.
初めてですね、こんなのは。日本地震国って言ってもこんなにひどいのは。
I've never experienced anything like this. I know Japan is a country with frequent earthquakes. I heard rumors about damages from quake in Kansai area, and I heard that it is as bad as that.
45.7% of residents here are over 65, and experts say this has contributed to the high fatality as many were elderly. Rescuers are racing for time, fighting against the crucial 72 hours time limit for survival, which is in the evening of the 4th January. Lifeline is cut off in wide area, but authorities say supplies, medical aid and heavy machineries are starting to reach some of the needed areas. But experts also say search, rescue and aid will take more time. Terence Terashima, CGTN, Wajima City.
Parts of northwestern Europe are struggling to cope after a series of storms dumped heavy rain and snow. In France, some northern areas are still under a red alert for flooding as rescue crews help evacuate residents from inundated homes. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports.
Boats where there should be cars, roads becoming rivers. Northern France is flooding again, just 6 weeks after rivers burst their banks in November. People have been moved to safety from flooded homes in northern towns, but they are starting to lose patience with the persistent wet weather.
The first time, I thought it was just bad luck. But now, experiencing this again, it's starting to hurt, be it in terms of our morale or in terms of our budget. We ask ourselves how we'll get through this.
Tired. We haven't slept in 3 nights. Tired and fed up. And then, well, it's always the same thing, cleaning. And now we're always scared as soon as it rains. We're scared. We can now see the river, even in the middle of the night. We're scared.
The River Leiter in Brittany broke its banks this week after the remnants of Storm Henk, which hit the UK, also swept across France's Channel coasts. Thousands of homes have been left without power, and regions across the north of France on amber and red alert for flooding. The European Union has granted assistance to France from its civil protection mechanism to mobilise emergency support to deal with the effects of the flooding. But that help has come too late for Blundec, just south of Calais, where it's déjà vu. This was the town a month and a half ago, and now it is starting the new year how it finished the old one, submerged. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Sierra Leone's former president has been charged with treason over his alleged role in a failed coup. Ernest Bai Koroma is accused of trying to topple the government of President Julius Maada Bio, who was re-elected in a disputed poll in June. Over 20 people were killed on November the 26th in coordinated attacks on government and army buildings. Koroma has denied involvement. US court documents identifying associates of the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein have been unsealed. High-profile names include former US President Bill Clinton, Britain's Prince Andrew, and the late pop star Michael Jackson. Many of the people identified aren't accused of wrongdoing. The names were contained in documents filed as part of a defamation case against Ghislaine Maxwell, who's serving 20 years in prison for helping Epstein recruit underage girls. A brutal cold snap has swept parts of Scandinavia, with temperatures in Sweden plunging to record lows. Up to 1,000 motorists had to be rescued after heavy snow left them stranded on a motorway linking Sweden and Denmark. Temperatures have fallen below -40 degrees Celsius in the region for a second day in a row. While Scandinavia experiences an intense cold snap, Austria has faced milder winters in recent years, but skiing remains the national sport. In places without enough snowfall, plastic slopes are becoming more popular. Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger reports.
What used to be Vienna's snow-covered skiing slope is now a plastic carpeted hill. Austrian Chinese Yexing Li and his fellow Viennese classmates are nevertheless happy about their first skiing experience.
It's a lot of fun. Maybe one time I'll bring my parents as well.
By offering skiing lessons for free, Vienna is trying to preserve the Alpine Republic's national sport.
I think it used to be a skiing nation. I think it has changed, especially with the prices going up and with lots of immigrants to Austria. And so, again, to have an opportunity like this where also immigrants have the chance to learn it is really cool.
Philipp Scholler, who built this dry slope, says up until 15 years ago, he used to ski here on real snow.
It's different when you don't have the snow, when you don't have the whole slope, when you have a different lift. But yeah, all in all, I'm very happy to still have skiing right in the city of Vienna, and I think that's a big win.
Are these plastic carpets going to replace snow on Austria's skiing slopes? Meteorologists say yes, if climate change isn't slowed down. Because if it isn't, by the end of the century, most alpine ski resorts will lack natural snow. However, if goals set by the Paris Agreement are reached, then traditional winter tourism can be saved. With dry slope lessons already booked out for the season, the Austrian capital plans to continue its plastic skiing initiative in the upcoming years. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Vienna.
China's ice and snow city, Harbin, is seeing an unprecedented influx of tourists. Many people from warmer parts of the country are flocking to the frosty north. Some have never seen snow and are paying to experience a freezing winter. Our correspondent Chan Meng-fei reports.
The city has been trending on Chinese social media for the past few weeks. And this, the icy slide, is the holy grail for these pilgrims behind me. They're queuing for up to 6 hours. Oh.
How long did you queue for?
5 hours.
It's worth it?
Yes, I'd say it's worth it.
Where are you from?
I'm from Jiangxi.
Wow, that's far.
Yes, very far. I took a plane.
So how do you like Harbin?
The north is, after all, different from the south, so it's worthwhile to come.
So to see this amount of ice and snow, and especially how everything is crafted, and imagining how many people have worked here, how many hours have gone into building all of this, and it's happening every year, it's very impressive.
It is super impressive. Do you know where they got this ice?
I would expect from the river, because earlier I saw one ice cube with a little fish inside who was frozen.
No way!
Yeah.
I'm real happy. During these epidemic years, my hometown had few visitors. Now, finally, people have come. The more, the merrier.
Tales of Harbin's incredible hospitality, reflected in the municipality's public thank you letter to its southern guests, have been the amusement du jour on the internet. Locals joke they've never been treated like this, and they feel like strangers in their own town. During the New Year's holiday, Harbin says it hosted more than 3 million tourists who brought in almost 6 billion yuan in revenue. That's about $840 million.
Harbin got so popular overnight, we didn't expect it. Turnover at the restaurant has doubled. For our southern guests, we prepare small portions and make them less salty and spicy so that they can enjoy it.
While Harbin's going viral, it's not alone in seeing a significant rebound in tourists in the first New Year since COVID pandemic measures were lifted in China.
I really think Harbin's boom is not an isolated phenomenon. From Zibo to Harbin, these domestic destinations did not become popular because they're cheap. Rather, it's about consumers pursuing something beyond the ordinary, something with cultural characteristics.
A small variety show has been organized for southern tourists venturing from Harbin to Mohe, some 1,000 kilometers away, by rail.
This is our effort to be innovative, to let southern passengers truly feel the warm and bold personalities of our northeastern people.
Never did I think I would one day be clubbing with Cantonese aunties on a train en route to China's northernmost city. But that is the magic of northeastern China. Chen Mengfei, CGTN, Harbin in Heilongjiang Province.
The headlines again. The US Secretary of State prepares for another diplomatic crisis mission as tension rises across the Israel-Lebanon border. Gaza officials accuse Israel of carrying out massacres in safe areas as more civilians die in strikes on Khan Yunis and several refugee camps. And the death toll from Japan's earthquake rises to 82 as a critical 3-day window to find survivors closes. And that is the world today. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.